Story 1. Not mandatory, but there was a voluntary program like this in the United States during the Depression. It was called the Civilian Conservation Corps. Participants received room and board, clothing, job training, and $30 a month, of which $25 had to be sent home. Most were single young men, so it went to their parents and younger siblings in exchange for working on various projects on public land throughout the country. The reasons for it were both to provide jobs, and because the Dust Bowl had opened people's eyes to the fact that the United States was not a bottomless well of natural resources. Erosion was a big cause of the Dust Bowl, and the Dust Bowl was a factor in the Depression, so it all tied together. They were also called Roosevelt's Tree Army, because one of the big things they did was plant trees for erosion control. In my state, they built most of the state parks, a lot of them in areas that had been deforested for charcoal manufacturing and were marginal for agriculture. You can still rent out cabins that they built, and they're great, really attractive, and shockingly inexpensive. I'm actually going to stay in one next week. Some of them have photos from the Civilian Conservation Corps days on the walls, and it's really neat to look at them and know that you're still enjoying what they worked on. I definitely support a program like that today, but I think making it voluntary is putting ethical considerations to one side more practical. For one thing, you would have to pay participants just like people drafted for military service get paid, and it would be very expensive if everyone did it. Plus, having it be voluntary means the number of participants can be matched to the amount of meaningful work to be done, and the workers are more motivated. With the Civilian Conservation Corps, people considered themselves lucky to be picked. $30 a month was an attractive wage, and 3 square meals every single day was a significant perk, so discipline was straightforward. Do what you're supposed to do or get kicked out, and most people didn't want to get kicked out. It would probably take stronger incentives to get the same level of buy-in today, but health care and student loan forgiveness would be a good start. A number of people have asked about how you rent the cabins I mentioned. The ones I'm familiar with are in Pennsylvania and can be reserved at the Pennsylvania State Parks website. Not all cabins are Civilian Conservation Corps built, but ones listed as rustic often are. Check individual park websites for details. There's usually a stay the night page with information on the cabins and sometimes a history page that will talk about the Civilian Conservation Corps' role in the park. Rates are based on the number of beds in the cabin and start at $35 a night for cabins that sleep 4. Weekends and peak times are higher, and there is a surcharge if you're not a Pennsylvania resident. The system takes reservations up to 11 months in advance. Some parks fill up quickly. Some parks allow dogs in specific designated cabins, and most parks have at least one ADA-accessible unit. Other states and some national parks also have Civilian Conservation Corps-built cabins available for rental, but as far as I know, there's no nationwide system to find out where they are. Story 2. I feel like instead of forcing people to do so, they should be encouraged to. For example, if this was being forced by the state, instead of it forcing you to go, it would pay people to plant trees, clean beaches, etc. This is the way to go. Story 3. I feel like forcing people to do it will just sour them against it. Also, I see people who make a career out of it mess things up all the time, and I can only imagine how unproductive a group of people who don't want to be there in the first place would be. Also, the big thing we are lacking isn't manpower for most of these projects, but funding. There's a backlog of people who are passionate about nature and have education and professional qualifications but can't find work because no one wants to leave their jobs. If the government were willing to invest a significant amount of money into funding more projects, then there would be more room in the budget to hire people who want to be there. No need to conscript people. Story 4. No. Some of us need to earn a living. Who is going to pay our rent while we're doing this? Will we lose our houses or apartments if we're not earning money for months on end and can't pay rent? Also, however worthy the cause, forced labor is still slavery and therefore completely immoral. It is better to convince people to care enough to volunteer to help out in their free time or pass legislation forcing companies to stop using plastic. By forcing people to do this against their will, you will turn them off the cause and make them less likely to care for the planet or recycle in the long run. Story 5. No, for pretty much every reason already given here. I would like to thank the original poster, though, for being so civil and polite when responding to people. It's a much better way to discuss things than just screaming at each other. Story 6. Military is not mandatory, and it's also not a few months. Would you get paid and have benefits? If not, most people cannot afford a few months of not getting paid. Story 7. So the old people who ruined the environment can force the young people to clean it up? Idiotic idea. Edit. Maybe remember the original poster's topic before commenting. The post is about a mandatory program to fix things, not an argument about whether things need fixing or not. It could also be said that a mandatory service program is drafting the public into cleaning up after corporations that made a fortune exploiting the earth, once again letting the responsible party sit back and do nothing to fix what they broke. A volunteer cleanup just helps politicians and corporations shift the blame toward personal responsibility and away from themselves. Picking up litter and planting trees won't save the world, but voting might. Story 8. Mandatory? No, especially not based on a military design where the government can dictate where you move and serve. Incentivized? For sure. A coordinated environmental task force jobs program along these lines, built for young and underemployed people, would be awesome. I'm not confident this would fix our global environmental issues without being accompanied by a serious effort on behalf of the corporate world to reduce pollution waste. But it won't hurt, and it's a good way to get people involved in conservation at an early age. Story 9. No. For the same reason, I do not believe in the draft. When it comes to war, if your people do not want to fight, they should not have to. Wealthy people throwing the bodies of others at problems they create is ridiculous. If massive corporations were not damaging the planet, you would not even have to ask this question, and me being forced to involuntarily clean up their mess would not be an issue. Why should I be forced to clean up the ocean while the people that caused the damage are drinking scotch on a yacht watching me? Story 10. No, because I don't think transporting millions of young people out of cities, towns, and rural areas to these destinations and forcing them to work will be helpful. I understand that they need to be made conscious of environmental issues, but I just don't think it would be effective, as in actually helping to get the work done. They could only do work that they wouldn't need a qualification or any special skills for. It would be a massive safety issue, making sure they don't drown cleaning the ocean or get injured planting trees, and it would cost massive amounts of money to pay, house, and feed them all. I generally don't think it's effective or fair to govern over people's lifetime like this, whether it's military service or this type of thing. It would be much more effective to have qualified workers do the work effectively and have all other people study or learn other skills as quickly as possible so that they can cut back on benefits, give them the ability to earn money and care for themselves, and as a result, also have them pay taxes sooner and longer, which will make it easier to fund the environmental projects. Story 11. The mandatory part is the problem. I would, however, support the use of on-duty military in those projects since that's the actual existential threat. Story 12. This would be much more fitting as an alternative to regular incarceration. In the United States, we need a complete rework of prison systems anyway. Making prisoners accountable and functioning parts of society while serving time has great rehabilitation potential. Also, giving them minimum wage for commissary savings and their family on the outside would be great too. Story 13. Versions of this already exist. It's more a question of advertising and growing them as our culture shifts. And a lot of other states, California, Texas, Maine, Arkansas, New Mexico off the top of my head. Story 14. If most of the environmental damage is caused by corporations seeking profits, corporations should pay to clean up. Another example of privatizing the profits and socializing the losses. Story 15. It seems like a good idea, but it really isn't. We should care more about the environment, but mandatory service would be very inconvenient. At this age, we are dealing with stress after stress. I would not want to have to put everything on hold for mandatory environmental service. While it's for a good cause, people might start to resent it and not want anything to do with the environment after. I don't know, just my opinion. There should be another way to get people to care more about the environment, but this shouldn't be it. Story 16. Not mandatory. I have a baby on the way and would not be comfortable at all with the government forcing me to be separated from him. Also, I do not think it would foster a very productive work environment for those involved. Most people would be upset to be forced and would have poor work ethic, which would actually make people care about and want to help the environment less. Then there is the question of whether it would be paid. If it is not, you have people losing homes, credit getting ruined, and whole livelihoods being destroyed. If it is paid, you still have the problem of how some of those people would pay their bills. For most, that would be fairly simple, assuming they are always able to access the internet, which is unlikely. But some people have bills that still require payment methods from the past, such as mailing or hand-delivering the payment, for example, Discount Motors near where I live. Frankly, I am completely against the government making any action mandatory. Story 17, yes, I would support it. Now the real question is, who is going to pay my mortgage, childcare, utilities, food, and so on while I leave for the forest for 2 months? Story 18, I wouldn't simply because environmental issues cannot be fixed by individuals but rather by corporations. The work that individuals do would do nothing to combat the thousands of acres of private land where trees are cut daily or the insane amount of emissions that factories give out. It would also create a sense of entitlement among the richest who control the corporations. We spent a certain amount of time fixing the Earth's environment, so we now have a free pass to do whatever we want with it. Story 19. Mandatory is something that I do not abide by. Instead, I would suggest incentives. Much like requiring a license and insurance to operate a vehicle on public roads, you don't have to acquire these, but if you want to drive, then it is your prerogative. What I would suggest is programs that, for example, substitute or waive tuition fees for your time and efforts. If it is your prerogative to receive an education, then this is something to consider. The Army does exactly this with their programs. You give your time and effort, they educate you, you apply these skills and knowledge to the Army for a while, and then to yourself. It's mutually beneficial. Everybody wins. Story 20. There is going to be a mandatory program in the same fashion in France soon for 16-year-olds. It is called civil service, and it consists of working for society, which of course includes environmental matters. Story 21. Never. America has fought and bled for freedom. Freedom is the reason for America. It's the ideal that brings us together. When you take that freedom away, even if it's to defend freedom such as in a draft, you're spitting in the face of liberty. Story 22. Not unless it provides equivalent rewards, which it probably will not. I've used this point multiple times, but how should people care to support the environment if they cannot or can barely even support themselves? Story 23. Forcing anyone to do anything is both morally wrong and inherently an inefficient allocation of resources. No matter how much you believe a cause is just and righteous, compelling others to serve that cause makes you an evil person. Story 24. You do not have to make it mandatory, just tie it to free college or some other social benefit. And why limit it to the environment? Why not help with disaster recovery or other social problems? This way, you help your fellow man, and you are rewarded for your effort. Story 25. Absolutely not. Offer the program with some nice incentives, such as college grants, health benefits, or something people would want to their benefit. But you cannot make it mandatory. Story 26. I think forcing them would only make them grow disdain for it. Similar to being forced to go to church every Sunday, I didn't grow to appreciate it. I hated it, and it's a large reason why I began studying it more and eventually became an atheist. What would be infinitely healthier? Promoting and encouraging it, especially in young kids. Is there any education about this outside of maybe a science teacher bringing it up once? People shouldn't be forced to do things, I don't think. Teach people to care. Teach, not tell them to. Story 27. Mandatory anything is usually terrible public policy. There are a lot of people with physical and mental disabilities which would make this sort of commitment very hard on them. Story 28. Real charity cannot be forced. Force people to do something and, at best, it will be half-hearted, but more often than not, this will result in corruption and other issues. Story 29. People really don't like the draft, so no. Sure, there are people who would be willing, but the uproar of being forced to do something might have people try to reverse our gains we've made out of spite. Story 30. No, if it is mandatory, people are going to hate it and we will end up worse than we started. I think it should be done voluntarily and mandatory only for inmates. Story 31. No, it is never a good idea to force people to do things they don't want to do. I was forced to go to Sunday school as a child and absolutely resented it to the point I lost all interest in anything to do with religion. If you want people to take an interest in something, forcing them to do so is the worst possible step you can take. Story 32. No, because I don't think that anyone should be forced into completing something they don't wish to do, not unless this mandatory service would provide free food, board, and a generous salary to all workers to compensate for infringing on our freedom of choice. While this would be a huge strain on the budget, not working or going to school for months would be a huge burden on young adults.